Hello, my name is Dr. Dylann Gold. So just to kind of introduce you guys to the webinar format, you can submit questions at any time today by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel that's on the right side of your screen, and we're going to answer some questions at the very end of the presentation. So just hang tight. So I am a postdoctoral fellow here at the Child Study Center and clinician. So let's get started. So today we're going to talk about early childhood anxiety, mostly kids who are a little bit shy or who are a little bit anxious. Talk about what is it, how does it work, and what can we do to help kids be really brave. So I'll start off with a little bit of a public service announcement, and that is that it's okay to feel scared. And as a matter of fact, it's necessary to feel scared. Anxiety is necessary. It's kind of our inner alarm system that we need to kind of know the different dangers of the world, right? It motivates us, it keeps us safe, it helps us to connect with others. We need it, right? So it's that little voice that tells us to look both ways before we cross the street, or that healthy dose of social anxiety that keeps us from wearing our PJs to work. So we all need a little bit of this anxiety to help kind of keep us going, keep us motivated. And so for kids, it's really important to help kids kind of navigate fears and these emotions and what they mean and what to do with them. So I like this quote by Eleanor Roosevelt: "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face." And I think it speaks really true to our population, our kids, and kids in general, and people in general, really. The more we approach things that make us uncomfortable, the bigger our world becomes. So it's really important to have the skills to be able to kind of move past any fears. All right, so social anxiety. So today we're going to be talking about, kids who maybe have an alarm system that's a little bit extra sensitive. Maybe their alarm responds to kind of minor threats or non-threats, situations that don't involve a speeding car, right? And this comes from temperament, genetics. We're often born with maybe a little bit more of a sensitive alarm system than others. And the piece that we're going to kind of more talk about today is how much environment can come into play with all of this. Because as we interact with the world, we learn different ways of avoiding things that make us anxious, and different people in different settings kind of interact with that experience, and that can kind of keep anxiety going. And let me show you what I mean. All right, so this is the cycle. This is how anxiety can kind of maintain and continue to go on and on. So we'll start at the very top here. So there's a child who's invited to play at a birthday party, right? So you can imagine this really shy child clinging to mom's leg, head buried in her thigh, and another kid comes over to invite the kid to play. So what happens to our shy kiddo? That anxiety increases. They start to feel really uncomfortable. They're starting to feel the somatic symptoms. Maybe their heart's racing a little bit. Maybe they're feeling a little bit sweaty. And so what they do in response to that anxiety, or what they might do, is they might refuse. They might cling tighter to the parent. They might bury their face. They might outright say no. They might start to get a little bit aggressive. That might be the initial response to their anxiety. This is what they do with that discomfort. And what happens is these are kind of pulling out all the stops. And kids learn that in those situations, sometimes maybe it'll be an opportunity for the parent to kind of engage them a little bit in a back and forth, or the parent will kind of be like, oh no, she's not really interested in playing right now, thanks though, and maybe cuddle and keep the child on their lap. And then what happens when all of the demands are removed, when either the parent rescues or the child is really successful at avoiding, their anxiety decreases, it goes down. The demand is no longer there, right? So we see this anxious kid, situations presented, they refuse, parent engages, all sorts of things transpire, and then eventually this other kid is getting bored. They walk away, and so the situation's over. The child's anxiety decreases, and what happens is they then avoid participating for a longer period of time, and what they've learned through this sequence is that when they avoid, when they cling to mom, when they, engage in a back and forth negotiation, when they hit, when they yell, that's what gets them out of the situation, and that's what leads to the decrease in anxiety. So this is, you can see how a child would learn that's what works. That's what works for getting their anxiety to go down. And so the idea is that there are two ways we can handle anxiety, right? We can avoid it, which leads to this cycle of learning that avoidance works and doing more avoidance in the future, and sometimes getting more anxious with more avoidance. And the other way to get through anxiety is by practicing, doing that very thing that makes you feel uncomfortable, which is how we build long-term bravery. So it's not sustainable that we work on avoiding things that make kids anxious. So the goal is then, how do we help kids to find their bravery, find their courage? Okay, so before we get to all of that, let's talk about what does anxiety look like in preschoolers, right? We have this idea of what adults do when they're anxious, maybe kind of, cowering in the corner, but that doesn't necessarily manifest the same way in young kids. And so something to really keep in mind is that we often see kids who present with oppositional behaviors, tantrums, aggression, and sometimes teachers, parents, caregivers can sort of chalk this up to, well, they're just sort of being a brat, right? They're oppositional, they're not listening, and that's that, right? And so what we find is that that presentation can also be a presentation of anxiety in young kids. This is, think about fight or flight. This is the fight part. And so one of the things that it's going to be really crucial to keep in mind is that we want to look for context clues. Think about what sorts of situations does this come up? Is this across the board? Is it sort of intermittent? Is it like always before karate class that this happens? That might be a clue that there might be some anxiety going on. So we want to kind of check out the context clues in the different settings. Okay, so these are some common presentations that we see in addition to this refusal, aggression, tantrum type. So being kind of slow to warm up around new people, perhaps in like a birthday party kind of setting like we were talking about, clinging to the caregiver, the parent. We talked about refusal, difficulty joining peer activities, so think like playground being really overwhelming, not really quite knowing how to jump in. Difficulty initiating one-on-one social situations and social interactions. This is a big one. Problems asking for help or being assertive. And this comes up a lot at school, right? If they're not quite understanding the assignment, they don't really know what's going on, having a hard time approaching the teacher and letting them know, hey, I'm confused or I need some help. The other piece of being assertive, so I hear this all the time, kids come home and they say, so-and-so was really bothering me at school. Parent said, well, did you tell the teacher? No. Did you tell them to stop? No. So part of one of the skills that we want to help kids to develop is letting other kids know, hey, I don't like that, please stop. So this is another thing that can sometimes come up and be a little bit more difficult for these kids. Reluctance to engage with members of the community. I had a parent once who really wanted her child to say hello to the bus driver. That was important. Waiters at a restaurant, having difficulty kind of communicating and engaging with people like that in the community. And then low classroom participation. So hand raising, participating in circle time, they might be a little bit more reticent to do that. Okay, so all right, we have an idea of what it looks like. We know what this cycle is all about, but what do we really do to break it? How do we stop this pattern from continuing? So here are some tools. The first piece is to notice what your instinct is, to notice what your instinctual reaction urges are in this situation. And I'm just going to kind of go over a few, but these can vary widely between people. So a lot of parents feel the urge to speak on their child's behalf or to answer for their child. Oh, she's just shy, or no, she doesn't really want to play right now. She's going to hang back with me. Kind of jumping in and rescuing a little bit and talking for the child. And this doesn't really give them an opportunity to approach situations on their own if mom or dad kind of swoops in and helps out each time. So that's one thing to notice if you're having urges to do that. The other piece, another one, is cuddling, giving hugs, inviting to come sit on the lap. Of course, affection is highly recommended across many different settings and really important for kids. But if we think about a child learning how to walk, right? you know, it's nice to have contact and touch with your baby, but ultimately, in order to get your kid to walk, you need to put them down. So think about it as giving them the opportunity to sort of spread their wings, maybe sort of toddle around a little bit, maybe fall a couple times, and that's okay. That's how kids learn how to walk. That's how kids learn how to be brave. So, you know, I think a lot of parents who are kind of pulled to more physical affection during these particular moments, it's really hard to sort of understand, like, well, why? He or she's really uncomfortable. This is what they need to help them feel okay. And we don't discourage affection, but there's definitely a more strategic way to be affectionate in a way that doesn't kind of undermine bravery. And then the next one is responding with questions or criticism. It's important to remember that kids this age often don't really know why they're feeling anxious. So oftentimes parents will say, oh, well, you know, you've hung out with these kids before. These are kids you've played with before. Why are you having such a hard time now? You saw so-and-so yesterday. What's going on in this situation? This shouldn't be so hard for you, right? Like kind of critical questioning comments, which aren't particularly helpful because kids can't really answer, and feeling criticized for like you shouldn't feel anxious is not really super helpful either. So that's one thing, noticing what your urge is to do in those situations. Every parent has their own pattern. The next skill that you can use is, and this is a tough one, minimizing your attention to the anxious avoidance behaviors, like whining, like clinging, like sort of like, you know, hugging and being on your lap, or screaming and yelling and tantruming. The idea behind this is, again, these are behaviors that kids try because they work. They feel like they're in danger. Their body, their anxiety is in overdrive. They go to a parent and they say, they whine, they yell, they'll do a bunch of things to kind of get out of the situation because it works, and they feel like there's a risk, there's a danger. And as we know, in these situations, there isn't necessarily a risk or a danger at play. So what we want to do is we want to teach kids that they can tolerate this on their own. And so when they do these behaviors that kind of take attention away from whatever the task is, or, you know, whatever the situation is that they're avoiding, we want to really not engage that so much. And then the other piece, kind of in conjunction with that, we're minimizing attention to anxious avoidance behaviors. We're turning off the light switch of our attention, and then we're giving big attention to brave behaviors. We're maximizing our attention. So using specific labeled praise, that would be how we would recommend doing it. So for a kid in the classroom, you might say, I'm so proud of you for raising your hand. You did a nice job asking your friend for a turn. So thinking about the things that are approximations, that are steps toward the goal. What's the approach goal, right? So that's going to be really important in attending to those behaviors, even minor ones. So for example, you have a child who's really reticent to join a group of kids, who's sort of hiding, and you catch them looking over to watch the other kids play. That might be something that you would start out praising, like, oh, I'm noticing that you're doing such a nice job looking at your friends play, you're watching them play. So highlighting and giving your attention to those brave behaviors. And lastly, similar vein to what we've been talking about, avoiding rescuing. So try and resist the urge to sort of swoop in and take over, and it's a natural instinct of a parent because you don't want your kid to be uncomfortable. So try and avoid that impulse. Okay, so those are some kind of basic strategies for how to promote some brave behavior, kind of on a lower level. Now we're going to talk about ways to set goals and sort of push for certain goals to be met. So here are some steps. We like to call them brave challenges. It can be a nice term because it helps kids to really feel good about what they're doing. It makes it into a little bit of a game. So here are the steps. So first we would establish a goal, and that is largely, what do we want he or she to do? Maybe back to karate. Maybe we want them to participate in karate. We want them to stay from start to finish. We want them to tolerate being in karate class. So that's maybe the goal. The second step is to establish a good starting point. Because maybe that's too hard. Maybe going for the whole time and being in karate is too hard when the child won't even go through the door. So maybe the starting point is watching the other kids from inside the karate studio, right? So that might be the first step, because maybe the last step is just too much of a jump. So that's something to think about. The next would be introducing the task to your child and potentially a reward system. What we know is that kids of this age sometimes are really motivated by social rewards like praises, or the idea of, they're motivated, they want to participate, right? But oftentimes they need a little bit something extra to help sweeten the pot, because they don't have the forethought to say, well, I really should develop my social skills because this will help me throughout my life and in college and when I go to work, right? They're not really having those thoughts. So sometimes kids of this age will need a little bit of an extra boost of a reward, so stickers, etc. The next step would be rehearsing. So you might show up at karate a little bit early, practice where you're going to sit and how you're going to walk through the door, providing praise the whole time. Following that, trying it out, right? And you want to give the right level of support. You don't want to jump in and rescue, but if he or she needs a little bit of help along the way, facilitating that and kind of setting the bar where it needs to be set. Next step would be labeled praises, whatever token reward system you have in your back pocket, implementing that if for a job well done. And then repeating that practice over and over until it's boring, until it's not that hard. This is a key piece. We want kids to gain mastery over certain steps and then work toward a new, harder goal. We then establish, okay, maybe the child participates in the first 5 minutes of karate, then watches the rest, right? We take little baby steps until we reach our ultimate goal. So then we repeat all of that. Okay. Now, the elephant in the room here is, gee, if only it were this easy, right? Because the truth of the matter is that this requires a lot of bravery on the parent's part. It's so hard to see your child uncomfortable. It's also sometimes uncomfortable when you're in public and your child's having a tantrum or whatever else. And so you kind of pull out all stops to just make it stop, right? And so this requires commitment and bravery on behalf of parents too. So what I would recommend, knowing your triggers. What are your own goals? Maybe you know that you're not ready to tolerate a super public situation where your child's really anxious and we're kind of seeing it through and helping them get to the other side of that hump. So maybe you might start with something in your own home or something with his or her teacher before or after school. So kind of knowing your own limits and knowing what you're able to follow through on is really important. Also developing a mantra or a coping statement, right? So something to the effect of like, this is going to be a learning opportunity for my child. This is how he or she gets to the other side and learns that it's okay and that it's safe. And we really want, and that's really the truth, right? But I'm sure a lot of parents out there have this thought of, oh my gosh, he's going to be traumatized. This is so hard. You know, he's never going to want to do this thing again. He's crying, he's screaming, right? There's all these thoughts that go through your mind of like, distress means that like, this is really bad. And what distress means is that he or she is working through it. They're getting to the other side of anxiety in the way where we have our eyes set on the long haul. Okay? Another one is tag team if possible. So whether a spouse or another caregiver, you know, any way to kind of divide and conquer and split responsibilities in terms of brave practice can be really helpful. It's a big job for one person. And then the last one, this is a question that comes up a lot. Modeling bravery for your child is really an important thing to do. So it's okay to let your kid know that you're feeling anxious or that something makes you a little bit uncomfortable, but letting them know, I'm uncomfortable, I'm nervous about this, but I'm going to try it out and be brave. That's one of the best things you can model for your kid. So it's not about being just sort of like born courageous, right? It's more about showing kids that like anxiety is normal, it's okay to feel scared, and I'm going to get through it. I'll show you how I do it. Okay. So then the question becomes, when do we seek help? When is it normal shyness versus something a little bit more? What we look for is the anxiety interfering with the child's daily functioning, or is it causing significant distress for the family? And a lot of times that comes down to, are we modifying daily routines to accommodate anxiety? Are we avoiding certain places to accommodate? Are there big meltdowns, you know, on a regular basis in certain situations? These are going to be really important things to consider. And also, if kind of pulling out all the normal parenting stops hasn't been helpful, then you might want to think about seeking consultation or getting a little bit of extra help. This doesn't mean that your child is going to have a lifelong diagnosis. It doesn't mean that there's, anything wrong. It just means, hey, we're going to see if there's something going on early. If we can catch it and prevent further development of this, then great, right? Because we know the earlier treatment happens, the more success we have in the future, and the kind of earlier we could change that trajectory of learning for kids. What we know is that kids who are showing real levels of interfering anxiety at a young age, they don't tend to grow out of it. So it's going to be really important to, have an eye on that and not sort of play the waiting game, because it doesn't have to be this like big production to get help. Just sort of a consultation, and oftentimes with a couple of consultation or treatment sessions, we're able to get kids on the right track. So it's not like sort of a lifelong branding to get your child a little bit of extra help. Something to remember. Okay, so we'll take some questions. But first, just to kind of let you guys know, we actually have an early childhood consultation service here. We have the clinical service, which does consultations. So if you're interested in learning more about that, or if you have questions, you can definitely feel free to contact our care management team. The contact information is up there, as well as my contact information. Okay, so now we're going to answer some questions. Okay, so the first question is, what do I do if my child refuses to do a brave challenge? Well, this comes up all the time. It's important to have a plan B, right? So what we think about is, how do we reassess the situation? There are a couple of pieces at play. We have level of difficulty of the task. Maybe it's too hard. Maybe we didn't rehearse enough. Maybe we have to go back out and try again. Sometimes simply removing yourself from the situation, re-rehearsing and re-entering can make a huge difference. That's another piece. Is the incentive potent enough, right? Maybe they don't care about stickers, right? Maybe they don't feel like motivated by picking an extra dessert that night, right? So we have to think about, are the rewards appropriate? So really what we're doing is we're kind of going back to that step-by-step guide, and we're assessing each piece. Did we rehearse enough? Is it too hard? Do we have appropriate rewards? How can I break this down into further like baby steps, right? If your child is refusing to get out of the car at karate, then maybe the goal is we drive to karate, we sit in the car, and we like keep a calm body for 15 minutes, right? We might have to start really small, and that's okay. So really we're kind of working on breaking things down further, figuring out where the situation breaks down, and trying to target some of those concerns. All right, let's see. Okay, my child is very anxious in certain classes at school. How can I help my child when I'm not around? That's a really good question. So, I would definitely encourage you to share some of this information with teachers and other caregivers. At the Child Study Center here, we do a lot of school consultation and often teach teachers how to manage this. But I've also had a lot of success with working directly with parents, and then parents being an advocate for their kids at school. So passing along materials to teachers, letting teachers know what works for them at home and what doesn't. So I would actually encourage you to approach teachers with these concerns, offer up suggestions and help. Usually teachers are really appreciative of that, because they don't necessarily have, the knowledge base to kind of treat anxiety and this kind of stuff on their own. And as you know, it's not really very intuitive, as we've kind of talked about. So I would encourage you to reach out to your child's teacher and sort of see what they'd be willing to do, if they'd be willing to let you to come in and talk with them about it. Okay, this is a good one. Do sessions with the Child Study Center occur with or without the child being present? That's a really good question. So the short answer is that, for the most part, the parent will pretty much always be present, or at least very much abreast of what's going on in the sessions. We do a lot of parent work. Like I tell families, I can help your child be really brave in the clinic, or be really well behaved in the clinic, but that's not really what you came in for. You came in so that you could work on home behavior, that you could work on school, that we can work on being brave in a lot of different places. So parents we see as really crucial to this process, so we're always going to bring parents in. The question then becomes, to what extent do we involve the child? And depending on each clinician's style and method and what the family really, finds most helpful, sometimes we will bring parents and kids in together and teach parents and coach parents in doing some brave challenges with their kids. Sometimes we'll have parent-only sessions where we kind of regroup and teach them some skills. And sometimes we will meet individually with kids without their parents, if that's indicated. But I think the take-home ultimately is that parents are always involved to a really large extent if you're doing the right kind of treatment. Okay. All right. My child seems to act out with physical responses, a lot of biting and hitting. How can I make this stop? As he's growing, it's becoming more unacceptable. It's a really tough one, right? And as we talked about, a lot of kids have these pretty intense reactions to anxiety. What I would recommend is trying to find ways to start really small and making some of the goals using safe hands and feet, right? So maybe the goal isn't to tolerate this entire stretch of time, right? Back to the karate example, right? Like maybe the goal isn't to like move forward, on the ladder of working toward karate. Maybe it's just like tolerating being there while using a safe body. So you can use a lot of these reward and labeled praise and, using your attention strategically kind of strategies in order to kind of incentivize or sweeten the pot a little bit, motivate your child to use safe hands and feet. Because this is really hard. It likely works, right? Like biting and hitting probably works at getting your child out of these kinds of situations. So it's really going to be about how can we break this down into smaller pieces? How can we make the goal safe hands and feet? So hopefully that kind of answers your question. And sometimes these answers are a little bit more nuanced, but I think that's a good place to start. Okay. Any suggestions for a child who does not speak at all to their teachers? That's a really good question. So I actually would have a couple of additional questions for you about that. And that is, have they ever spoken to their teachers? Do they speak a little or just not at all? How long is it have they just started a new school? Or has this been kind of going on all year in the same school? If it's the case that it's February now and your child has been in the classroom and hasn't spoken to their teachers in a while, and they're showing really good language skills at home and that they're able to speak, so there's that mismatch, I would probably recommend a consultation. Sometimes kids who have a lot of difficulty speaking have selective mutism. Not to say that that's necessarily what's happening, but it sounds like it would be worth an evaluation if it's been like a really extended period of time, more than like a couple of months of not speaking at all to the teacher. And the good news is that treatment for selective mutism is very similar to what I just described. So a lot of the skills would translate, but it's a little bit more nuanced. So I would actually recommend seeking a professional to do a consultation for that. Okay. How does screen time affect wallflower behavior? Screen time, that's a good one. This comes up constantly. I think when it comes to screen time, every parent is going to have their own set of values for what they want their child to do or how much time they want their child to spend on a screen. I think what's important to think about is, what is the function of their being on the screen right now? So if we bust out the iPad every time the child goes to her brother's soccer game so that the child can avoid having to talk to other parents or other kids that approach, and it's sort of a tool for isolation, then we want to think about working on some bravery there, right? Using the iPad at home in non-anxious situations, I would say, like, doesn't necessarily have to have an impact on this, but it's like if the screen time is happening during brave opportunities and they're becoming then missed opportunities, I would say that's when we have to think about how to be a little bit more strategic. Maybe the screen time can be used as a reward for being brave, right? It's not necessarily about cutting it back. It's more about, well, maybe it is, but it's more about how to be strategic. When do we provide these privileges for our kids? All right, more questions coming in. Okay. All right, my daughter is in an ICT class. Other kids raise their hands faster than she does. She has stopped raising her hands. What can we do to help? So this is a really good one. Unclear whether it's based in anxiety or, just maybe a little bit slower to raise their hand. But either way, I would probably approach it in a very similar way. So encouraging the teacher to first be aware of this. I wonder if the teacher can give her a couple of extra beats to raise her hand and give her more opportunity. Another piece is providing incentives and goals, right? Just like the steps we had talked about. So maybe the goal is helping her to re-engage in raising her hand, to re-engage in the classroom. So we might set a goal for snack time or carpet time, whatever it is, that you're going to raise your hand once during this activity, right? And I might remind you, I might give you a little thumbs up reminder. And when you do, there's going to be a great labeled praise, there's going to be a sticker, whatever that is motivating for the child. So I would say it's all in the setup. Oftentimes, if we just give kids the opportunity, if we set the goal and make it clear up front, if needed, present rewards, that can be really helpful. So it's really about setting the stage. Okay, last question. All right, are there any books or resources for parents? This is a good one, and actually I meant to create a slide. I'm wondering from our helpers here if I would be able to send some resources or include that. Okay, so I will include some resources when I ultimately, when you guys get these materials. All right, excellent. Okay, so on behalf of the Child Study Center, thank you for joining me. Once you leave the webinar, you will receive a survey, and we would really appreciate if you could complete it. You will also receive a follow-up email within a day or two with a link of a recording of today's presentation. All right, and we hope you can join us for our next webinar, the OCD, ADHD, and tic disorder triad. Why are these conditions connected and what it means for treatment, with Michelle Miller. And that's on Tuesday, February 21st at 1 p.m. All right, thanks again.